Hello, and welcome to the Autistic Me podcast. I am Christopher Scott White, speaking as the Autistic Me. During my last visit to a big box retailer, I noticed it was back to school time. Yes, it's July, but we're already thinking about back to school. And today we're going to be talking about 504 plans, IEPs, and external supports that you can obtain outside of the school setting. I'm being joined by school psychologist Laura Reber, who has worked with students from the neurodiverse community for more than a decade. Parents and families have to navigate the IEP and 504 plan processes, advocating for appropriate supports. Many of us find additional supports outside school foster success. Laura founded Progress Parade to help students with ADHD, autism, and cognitive differences succeed. Progress Parade offers one-on-one tutoring and homework mentoring. So, Laura Reber, welcome to the Autistic Me podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
First, I'd like to give you a chance to explain who you are and your background to listeners so they have an appreciation for what insights you're bringing to this show that they might not have as parents.
Sure, of course. Yes. So, as your great introduction shared, I'm a school psychologist. So, a lot of times parents, when they're at an IEP meeting, there's so many people at the table. So, it can be hard to keep track of who all the different people are. But the school psychologist is typically the person who has done cognitive assessment or intelligence assessment, it's also called, and academic assessment. Sometimes they're the ones that might have given you like a behavior rating scale or autism rating scale. Usually we're kind of the ones that look at the different assessments and write up the reports for that. So that's my background. That's what I studied. I worked in the schools for several years and also was an ADOS evaluator for a while, which some of your community might have done the autism diagnostic observation scale or the ADOS. So I was a part of the ADOS team in my school district. So I was had a lot of experience just with finding the appropriate diagnosis and support for students who had symptoms of autism too.
To contextualize your background, you have degrees that are related to school psychology. You are a specialist in school psychology.
Correct. Yes. A specialist in school psychology is a degree that sometimes confuses people, but it is essentially between a master's and a PhD. It's a 3 full-time year, 90-hour graduate degree.
When you were working in the public schools, then you were responsible for both evaluating and then providing insights to the IEP and 504 teams?
Correct. Yes, I was a part of the team that helped decide what goals the students had and what supports were appropriate for them based on the evaluation.
The first thing that I'd like to touch upon then is the difference between the IEP and the 504 for those parents who might not have, read everything out there and they're tossed into this now as elementary school parents. My experience as a parent, as an educator, our children have gone from 504 plans to IEPs.
Hmm.
And as an educator, I often had to work with students who are migrating either up or down in those. And a lot of people think that once you go one way, that's where you are and you're stuck there. If we could, let's talk a little bit first about the 504, which is covered by the Rehab Act of 1973.
Hmm.
And the 504 plan is sort of to help a student succeed, but they're very targeted supports, correct?
Correct. Yes. And the most important thing about a 504 plan is this distinction can confuse parents. So I'd like to talk about it a little bit. It's providing accommodations, not modifications. So that can sound a little bit like nitpicking vocabulary, but
Mhm.
what accommodations really are is that there's no change to the difficulty in the curriculum. The student is still accessing or engaging in the exact same curriculum that their peers are, but they might need just some minor accommodations or changes in the way they access the curriculum. So the most concrete example literally is like a ramp to get into a school if somebody has mobility challenges. They're still attending the exact same school, they just have to access it a different way. So that's a really concrete example, but some more abstract examples are students who have motor challenges, fine motor challenges that are really make handwriting something that's really challenging to do, might have an accommodation that they do all their writing on a laptop or typing or some sort of device. There's lots of different devices to help with typing so that handwriting is out of the equation. Or students that have sensory reactions in certain environments maybe need to take their test in a different environment so that they're able to really show what they're capable of and what they know. So a 504 plan really does give the student equal access to the exact same curriculum. There's no change in difficulty in the curriculum itself. It's the same curriculum.
When a student is diagnosed with a significant challenge, they are often moved into the IEP or given an IEP directly without first going through the 504. An individualized education plan comes through the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And when I speak to groups about this, I try to explain that the IDEA may not apply to your child. An IEP plan is very different, but it has a lot more constraints and commitments on the part of the school. We have to do a lot more as educators when we are facing an IEP.
Correct. Yes.
I know I have to file what accommodations I'm providing, what alterations I'm providing.
Correct.
So, could you explain how an IEP, for me as an educator, to be honest, it means additional paperwork and lesson plans because I've got to prove that if I have a high school age student in my college course who has an IEP, how I'm altering the nature of the course.
Correct. Yes.
So could you explain that from a school psychologist point of view?
Of course. Yeah. So you're right. An IEP it's a legally binding document. It's binding in the whole country. So if you get an IEP in one state, another state has to honor it. It's a really serious document. It means a lot. As far as the documentation that's required, anybody that's held an IEP can tell you, if your district's printing it out, like it's a big document. There's a lot of information in there. And that's kind of the paperwork burden that you're talking about as far as needing a lot of paperwork. But yes, there are with an IEP as opposed to a 504 plan where we talked about it's the same curriculum. An IEP, you really are altering or modifying the curriculum. So, students might have different goals and they will have different goals in whatever the targeted areas are than their peers, than their general education peers. So if a special education teacher is working on IEP goals, they do have to document the progress towards the goals, what they're doing to work on the goals. So to make this a little more concrete, a lot of autistic students have speech language therapy goals. That's one that a lot of students have. That's a service. So since that's an additional service, that is an IEP service. It's not a 504. There's no services in 504s because again, 504s are just accommodations. So speech pathology is a service. So the speech pathologist then has to say, here's the goals that I'm going to be working on with the student in articulation or speech meaning. And then here's how I'm going to document progress. And then I'm going to have to meet with the parents annually to go over the progress and send frequent reports to the parents about progress. So you do have to have your goals clear and also keep documentation of what you're doing for the goals and the progress towards the goals, because there's a lot of, as there should be, a lot of, we need to prove that if we're modifying the curriculum, that it's working for the student, that this individual plan that we're writing, that the student is progressing and that they are continuing towards their goals. So we want to that we take that seriously, and so it does document both the services, and then there are usually accommodations too. So it's kind of like 504 plus, because the 504, like we said, there might be accommodations of separate test environment or using a laptop to type, or different supports, like if they're fidgeting, like having different supports at their desk. There's a whole list of accommodations. Extended time on test is another one that's really common. Extended time to turn in homework, reduced homework. So these are all accommodations that could also be a part of the IEP. So the IEP lists what the students' needs are, how we're going to meet those needs, and the services and accommodations that will help us meet those individual needs.
As a professor, I would encounter the transition from high school to adulthood. In Minnesota and Pennsylvania, we have early entry. It's now increasingly common nationwide, where you will have students who are in dual enrollment. They are in their local high school and at your university campus. And one of the things we had to prepare students for is the IEP only lasts for the K-12 years. So these students were very shocked to discover that their 504 or their IEP, that second year of college, when they were technically no longer dual enrolled, the rules changed very suddenly.
Yes.
And one of the things that a good IEP, a good 504 team will do, especially in secondary school, is tell the parents, your child is going to experience some changes as they go to the community college or the local campus. And I think a really good school psychologist on the team gives you some warnings. Let's prepare. Let's see, can you reduce some of the accommodations? Can you adjust some of the access that we have used, some of those
Supports, yeah.
supports? Yeah. And
Hmm.
this is a very difficult thing because some of the parents will think that this is unfair or somehow penalizing their student. So, how do you explain to a parent that part of what we have to do in education is help students transition from elementary to middle school or junior high and then to secondary high school and then for beyond? We have to slowly help the student decide how much supports are required. How do you help parents understand that, and how do you help them feel comfortable with the fact that their child can succeed, and that's what we're working towards, is that increased independence?
Yes, that's a great point. I think as a parent, it's really easy and understandable that you want the most supports you can get for your student. You want your student to have as much help as and support as they can get. But I think it's important to recognize that the goal is independence. The goal is that your student can function successfully with as few supports as possible. That's really what we want to get to, so that, we can transition into college where we don't have these same support. We don't have this whole IEP process. It doesn't exist at the college level, and into adulthood, where we can find employers that can work with us, because we all, to a degree, have different needs from everybody else. So we can find employers, but we do need to find a degree of the most independence we can really have from the IEP, from the 504, from the support. So I think it's really important that, yes, as school teams, that we are making transition plans, and that once students don't need the supports, that we slowly transition them back. And I think it's important for us as school psychologists and special education teachers to really help the parents understand that the goal is not to get the students the most support possible. The goal is to give them what they need to no longer need the supports, and some students will always need some kind of support. That's, but to the extent that they can, that independence is possible, we want to work towards that. And I think that can be hard for parents. It can be, well, I don't want to lose these supports. Like, it's what's been working, and I don't want to go back to where my student didn't have these supports. I think it's important to focus as school teams on the growth that the student has made and specific examples of how we've seen the student exhibiting skills that we think we can try this, and also to make changes gradually. I think you're right that we don't want to just jump from senior year full IEP accommodation services to college where they don't get these things. We want to start a couple years back, slowly trying different supports, trying without different supports, so we can make that transition more gradual.
My wife and I, as parents, have experienced the shift from having wraparound support one on one for our youngest to having only weekly visits from the one on one aide in the class. And of course, the youngest struggled more and more with that environment. But one of the things that the little one has to learn is that her work isn't going to be easy and someone's not going to help her all the time. This is very difficult as a parent. As a parent, you want to see all those A papers, you want to see all those perfect papers. And then when you start seeing your child doing the work on her own, like, oh, wait, those are B's and C's.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you explain that the school's not being mean? What they're trying to do is integrate your child into the mainstream, that mainstreaming in the least restrictive environment
Mm-hmm.
of the class
Yes.
as an individual in the class instead of an individual with an adult always standing next to her.
Right. Yeah, I think that you brought up least restrictive environment. That's a great term for parents with IEPs or 504s to know. It sounds kind of like confusing, like, what's least restrictive environment? But that's actually something that we're obligated as educators to adhere to. So least restrictive environment essentially means that we want the environment to be restricted as little as possible, meaning we want the environment to look as much as possible like their general education peers. So we want an environment that's most similar to the gen ed or to neurotypical peers. So yeah, I think explaining that it's a mandate, that we don't, it's not really, we don't get to exactly choose how, we need to give your student the environment that is most like the gen ed peers in which they can be successful. And and explaining, I think long term, I think as, if you have a student that does have special needs, you're living day to day a lot of times, which I think is understandable. And all you really should do most of the time. I mean, get through every parent has to get through each individual day. But I think, just taking a moment to step back to kind of high level and look at, okay, well, we want, your child isn't going to have a one-on-one aid at their job. So we need to make sure that we're moving slowly towards that. So, we want to move from having a one-on-one aid dedicated all the time to maybe having a shared classroom aid, to maybe having like it sounds like your child has been able to do, to having once a week check-in support. So we're not going to be doing anything suddenly, but we do need to slowly move from where we are here in elementary school to an adult that can find find something that works well for them, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be college for every student, but kind of whatever next step is happening.
And I don't think we're alone as parents feeling like, oh my gosh, our child is being abandoned. The wraparound aid is no longer there. Now she's not getting the best grades. Now she's not succeeding the way she used to. And so it's very hard as a parent and as a disabled advocate to say, wait a minute, I kind of need to know that she can't read.
Right.
It turns out she was behind grade level, but we didn't know that because the aid was helping so much. We didn't
Right.
know some of her weaknesses.
Right. Definitely. Yeah, and we get that from parents too that didn't realize that they were doing their homework. They thought, well, I was just helping, and then we see that the parent was actually doing the homework without even really realizing it.
And that's very easy to do as a parent. Honey, let's reread that. Let's reread it again. And you keep giving them chances until they get it right. And then when they have a test in school, they don't have that extra repetition and nudging,
Mm-hmm.
that gentle nudging. When a family like ours wants extra supports, we can contact outside testing. We can contact a psychologist, a psychiatrist. I will say both of my daughters have their own psychiatrists, not the same one. They have separate ones who have specialties. They have had their own psychologists do the assessments. We are very, very fortunate. But the thing we don't have are educational supports. We do all of the mental health supports.
Mm-hmm.
So a company like yours, Progress Parade, specializes not in the psychological supports, but in the academic supports.
Correct. Yes.
So, how does that fit into the picture? So, we're helping our daughters with their mental health needs. And if a family now wants to address the academic needs, what does Progress Parade do that's different than the mental health experts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yes, we love to partner with mental health experts. So, for example, if a student is having a lot of anxiety about like blank page syndrome, I mean, this comes up a lot with all students, like just trying to come up with ideas, the writing process can just be so hard for anybody, but especially students with diverse learning needs, autism, ADHD, because it's such a process. You have to like plan it, you have to come up with the ideas, you have to get it out on paper, which handwriting can be a real burden for a lot of students. So, and then you have to edit it. So that's a whole process. So if a student's working on their anxiety, then we can use some of those strategies that they're learning to like help them with their attack something that makes them nervous academically. But yeah, aside from partnering with outside providers, we work directly on any academic skill that's needed. A lot of parents feel, even if they have IEP plans or 504 plans in place, that their student really needs some additional one-on-one support. A lot of times parents are not, feeling like the support is coming quickly enough. So, students that are struggling to read, they have to go through a whole process of getting help at school and then getting evaluations, and they want to just make sure their students able to read. So we're really able to provide that specialized instruction early. Really provide, we usually use phonics instruction for reading, so provide that structured phonics support and kind of get the student reading more quickly. I mean, and prevent a lot of kind of later headaches with an academic challenge. We also do a lot of executive functioning coaching. So very quick summary of what executive functioning is, if people aren't familiar with it. a lot of people think of having a tutor as working on academic skills like reading, writing, and math or homework. Executive functioning skills are working on the organization, time management, task completion, turning in assignments. Sometimes students are completing their assignments but not turning them in. So just trying to figure out where in their kind of process it's breaking down is a big part of what we do. But we work a lot with executive functioning coaching, particularly in this climate where a lot of schools transitioned back and forth between online and in-person schooling. A lot of students really struggled with that from an executive functioning standpoint. Like, where do I find my assignments now? Like, how do I know what I have to work on? And so those are, not direct academic skills, but they are really important to student success, both in school and beyond, in college and in work, being able to know how to kind of manage your tasks, get long-term tasks done. So we teach kids how to do that, and we dig in and make sure that whatever we're learning, we apply in school. So we've seen students that struggle, with failing multiple classes, that we can really help them pull up their grades and give them that one-on-one support they need. So just kind of supplementing and working with outside providers and also with the schools to ensure that their academic needs are being met with the right specialists. That because that's another big part of what we do is we have an intake call with every parent that reaches out on our website, progressparade.com, and we just trying to get a sense of like, what are your goals? Like, how would you know that tutoring was a success for your child? And then we make sure to choose the right specialist for that specific goal, because as any parent of a diverse learner will tell you, that match is so important, that having the right skills for what your child needs is going to be really important to a successful experience.
You mentioned executive function, and it's often on the goal for autism and ADHD. It's one of the goals of IEP plans is to help the students be more organized. But realistically, that often has to happen at home too, because the work comes home. How often does the teacher hear, well, I left the book at home, I left my homework at home, even though we can make it part of a 504 or an IEP that we're going to work on executive function, time management skills, planning skills, personal organization, it does seem to me that often outside coaching is essential because so much of this happens at home or outside of the school setting.
That's right. Yeah, it can be a great homeschool bridge to hire a tutor because, yeah, you're right. Like, the students need to practice it in multiple settings. And yeah, completing their homework happens at home. Making sure they have their homework ready to go and take back to school happens at home. So, and also parents, sometimes want to participate in part of our sessions so that they can work on some of those things. I mean, the teachers have many students, they're not able to sit down and provide direct coaching to parents like that. So that can be another thing that parents want to know, like, how can I work on this stuff to ensure that, my student is continuing to develop these skills?
Letting parents know that some of this you will have to do at home because the school, as we discussed, the IEP, the 504, those mandates are very narrow. They cannot and will not alter the type of class. They will not, they call it the nature of education. So if I'm teaching an auto shop class, you can't tell me that your child isn't going to learn about welding or learn about how the engine works. Maybe the auto shop class isn't the right class. K-12, that's, we hit these things where we explain to a parent, we cannot modify the nature of instruction or the outcome, the academic outcome expected for credit. So how do we help parents prepare for those meetings? And I don't want to say prepare to be disappointed, but that is the kind of where I was coming from as a parent, is you have to accept that the school can't do everything.
Right.
So how do you tell a parent, don't get defensive? You have to learn to listen to the school and understand that they have 180 students or whatever in that particular grade level. We've discussed on this podcast and on my blog, schools often don't even have a dedicated school psychologist. They have someone who roves about the district
Mm-hmm.
and is on a campus for, like Tuesdays and
Right.
Thursdays from.
Right.
So
Yeah.
as a parent, how do you explain that? Don't be too disappointed. The school's doing what they can. We're here. Some of it's going to have to be done with something like Progress Parade.
Yes, that's a great question. I mean, I think explaining another kind of catchphrase, free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, is explaining to parents there's kind of a minimum standard that schools have to meet. It's not going to be the gold standard. It's It's free and appropriate public education. So that means that there's a certain criteria they have to meet, and those are the criteria they're usually going to meet. Of course, individual districts, individual schools vary a lot, a lot. You don't have to go far to find somebody very frustrated with their special education team or their special education process, but you do hear people who are really happy with the teams too, that they really feel like that they, overall are doing what their child needs. So there's a lot of variability in people's experience and in what schools do. But I think understanding that they're here to give your child a free and appropriate public education. It doesn't have to be a gold standard education. If you want your child to have more than that, then you have to do it. I think most parents kind of understand that after some initial meetings and just kind of seeing what happens at school. That kind of like you said for your family, a lot of parents do choose to pursue private evaluations because they know that those are going to always be more in depth than a public evaluation. Private therapy, because school social work, private therapy is always going to be more time. You can choose the fit for your student. And, with Progress Parade, it's kind of like, well, yeah, your special education teacher is going to be meeting hardly ever one-on-one. It's usually small groups or whole classes of students. So it's kind of like if you want to have one-on-one support from a special education teacher, then a resource like Progress Parade is what you need to turn to. Again, if you want that one-on-one support, that's more the gold standard instead of like a free and appropriate public education.
If a family is looking at those additional supports through Progress Parade and similar services, we have to be aware. I just had to run the charges through for some supports for our daughters. It's not uncommon to have to spend a couple of $100 a week or more for your family to get these services. They're not free.
They're not free, it's correct.
And all too often, they're not covered by health savings accounts, insurance, state aid. These are unfortunately private services, and that is, for better or worse, the system we have.
Correct. Yes.
So contacting Progress Parade, this will probably be for 99% of people out of pocket.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, sometimes health savings accounts can help with it, but yeah, for most people it is out of pocket.
We are blessed. We have some state aid for our daughters that we can use for anything, but there's a cap on it and we have to submit the bills. So we can get tutoring for them, but not every family gets that sort of support from their state.
It's true. It's true. It does vary a lot by state. And there are some companies that people are lucky for. The companies will pay for some tutoring. We've had some people reach out in that situation. So, sometimes you can find some little pockets of help, but for the most part, it is private pay. It's parents paying directly for services.
So if a parent is interested in Progress Parade, it is an online website, progressparade.com.
Correct.
Does all of the consulting and mentoring currently occur online?
Yes, it all occurs online, and there's a few reasons for that. Some students respond really well to online, and some students don't. So if that is your student or not, probably, especially after the past year. But the huge benefit of the online is obviously the match. Is that we have a team of 100 tutors, so we can choose the best match for the individual student. We're not bound by geography or who can commute to your house or who lives close enough to you. We can choose from the whole team. So it really does help us get super particular and specialized for students who have particular and specialized needs. So that's what makes me really excited about it. And there are a lot of students that respond really well to the online, to the one-on-one. And a lot of parents had a negative experience with group online services this past year with classrooms, which is completely different from a one-on-one online experience.
And what grade levels do you currently serve at Progress Parade?
It's a great question. So we definitely serve kindergarten through 12th grade in all areas. Most of the parents who reach out to us do have a diverse learner. So an IEP or suspect a diverse learning need. It's not a requirement to reaching out for us, but because we do have special education teachers and school psychologists and reading specialists on our team, that's just who tends to gravitate towards us. And then we also do help students transition to college. We don't do college content tutoring, but executive functioning coaching, transitioning towards more independence. We do help with that too. And that's something that does come up because, as we kind of talked about earlier, the high school transition teams do a mixed job of how well they prepare students for that transition. So And sometimes parents don't realize how much they were helping their student, how much they were being their kind of frontal lobe in work completion and stuff. So we don't realize it until their student is now without them in a different location. That happens sometimes too. That so we can kind of help fill that gap in too.
As a professor, the hardest thing I have had to do with the early entrance or the dual enrollment student is when they hit the FERPA cutoff age. So the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act applies to K 12 and students under 18. But once a child is over 18 and at a college, I cannot legally talk to their parents.
Right.
So if you've had a child who's had an IEP, they're now at a college or university, the parent has been accustomed to meeting with the instructor, meeting with the faculty, the administration, and now they're being told, I cannot talk to you without a release form signed by your child.
Right.
And so that's something I beg high school counselors and high school teachers to explain to these students is you really need to think about this because when you become 19 years old and at college, suddenly your instructors have a whole lot of legal limitations on what they can do.
Right. Yeah, because you're an adult and they can't just be sharing your information around. So yeah.
And I cannot provide accommodations to an individual student without a disabilities documentation from the disability services.
Right.
So again, I explained to high school parents, since that's sort of the group that most often invites me, come talk to us about college. I try to explain to them, your child needs to know how the IEP and 504 worked so he or she, so they can become advocates in the college setting. So they'll know, what questions do I ask? What do I seek out in services? What are my rights and what rights don't I have?
Right. How will it be very different? Right.
And I think that that's important. So when we're coaching students and preparing them for not just high school, but then the life after high school, again, it's a very difficult transition if you're not prepared. There will be less extra time on tests, maybe not elimination of all extra time, but there will be less. We are actually given guidelines like you can give 1.25 times it's very strict for most colleges or universities. When you're tutoring students, do you explain to them we need to learn to work more and more with less and less accommodation, less and less supports, not because we're trying to be mean, but we want you to succeed in high school.
Yes.
The reason we're focusing on these executive functions is because you're going to be on your own.
Yeah, and similar to you, we do work a lot with the learning self-advocacy piece too, like understanding here's what I need to be successful so that you can ask for it. So we when we're working with college students, for example, we do encourage students while we're sitting here, let's write an email to your professor sharing like here's the services I got, how do I or here's how do I find the disability office at my college. Sometimes they're called different things, so that can be there's a lot less uniformity at the college level as far as like how to access these and how schools set it up and where the disability office is or what it's called. So trying to help them navigate those things is also a part of what we do, but certainly all throughout the support that we provide is building an independence. Like how can we scale back the support that we're providing and show you that you can be successful more independently, because that's ultimately the goal. But I think, you're right. We work a lot with high school students or with college students that are referred to us to just self-advocate, like know yourself and get and figure out how to ask for what you need, know what you need, and communicate that to people. And a lot of times at the college level, that can be really overwhelming.
You mentioned you have over 100 tutors available.
Correct.
In the K 12 setting, I have often found two subjects are the dominant subjects, English and math,
Mm-hmm.
language arts and mathematics. You have specialists in those fields to help students navigate the complexities of those alongside their neurodiverse needs.
Yes. Yep. We do a lot of teaching kids to read, a lot of like as they get older, reading comprehension. Teaching kids to read, we use a lot of multisensory techniques, which some kids find useful, like Orton Gillingham and Wilson or to kind of famous multisensory techniques, but it can be a little bit of a different approach to reading if there's a student who's not responding to more traditional phonics instruction. So we do that. And then, yeah, working on reading comprehension, a lot of writing support in the English language arts sphere. A lot of students with autism and ADHD struggle a ton with the writing process, and math too. I mean, there's a lot of every student's different. No two students are the same. A lot of people understand math conceptually, but maybe need some help like remembering all the details that they need to do in calculations. And that can be tied to executive functioning. They're making a lot of little mistakes, or transitioning from word problems that can be really hard from a comprehension perspective. So yeah, we always have a conversation with the parents to get a sense of, and actually if they go to progressparade.com, the book a free consultation comes straight to me. So then I can just really tease apart like what is going on here, what are your students' goals, and then choose the right specialist for both the academic need and the neurodiverse need, both pieces.
Why do you think there's a need for services like Progress Parade? What has led to this need for additional supports, especially during this virtual learning experiment that we have just undergone?
Yes, yeah, the unwilling experiment participants. One thing is just I think as a society, as we continue to evolve, we are recognizing more and more what people need. And I think in my parents' generation, I think kids that were just not getting the support they need or considered like weird are now like we're understanding like this is a neurodiverse this is a neurodiverse individual. Like there are different ways that we can meet the students' needs. So I think as we develop in our understanding of what people need and of different diagnoses, then we are able to more specialize in supporting them and helping them be successful. And I think that's part of it. And I think part of it is just, parents realize that education is so important, that being able to read and being able to do math and write and communicate via writing, it's so important. So they do want to get some extra help for their students to push them along, aside from kind of being in a in a general education or special education setting. They want to kind of make sure that that's a base that's covered, because it is so important to future job skills and things too.
I tell parents that whatever label your child has, don't focus so much on that. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for the APA, is a moving target.
Yep, very moving. But from IDEA also has emotionally disturbed still in there. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, is that still doing in there? Like, can we please get rid of that? It's a very moving target. And I think if you're familiar with Iowa's view on special education, I like it a lot better. But I don't know if you know about it or what their model is.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. Is the states have very different standards in language too, even in their documents. Comparing even the ICD to the DSM, I try to tell parents don't get hung up on this. My daughters have had different diagnoses at different times and in different locations. I've had them. The commonality is the executive function is impaired, whether it's the ADHD, the autistic traits, the PTSD, or RAD in some cases for students. It doesn't matter. Executive function coaching does seem to be effective.
Yeah, that's right.
So the label, I would tell parents, don't worry about the label. Worry about finding a great coach.
Right. Worry about the skills that you want to see improved. I think a lot of times people see the label as the end goal. They're like, well, I need to find the right label because if I find the right label, then I'll know what my student needs. I'm like, well, no, you already know what your student needs. Your student needs to turn in their assignments. Your student needs to learn how to read. So let's, at Progress Parade, we really focus on, diagnoses can be messy. I mean, sometimes students get diagnoses just piled on, there's just so many. And I'm like, I don't even understand what this even means. Cause ADHD and anxiety in kids overlaps, and, kids with autism often have attention challenges. So, it's like, I don't really know when you start to pile on. And a lot of times that happens, you get a different evaluator and you get a different diagnoses. And so we really focus on like, what do we need to change as far as the behavior and how can we get there? We're not, I think I agree with you on that. I think people view the diagnosis as a solution when it's really meant to be there as a tool to help understand the treatment.
And I wish that not just parents, but even self advocates understood that, yes, you have a label right now from the DSM, but what's important is, are you getting the mental health support, the physical health support, the family supports you need, regardless of the label? Because the label, yes, the insurance company might want it or the state providers might want it, but it's far more important to have someone teach you how to use a calendar, teach you how to make a list, teach those skills. The label won't matter if you learn to make good lists. It helps you regardless of whether it's the ADHD or the autism.
Right.
The good list helps you.
Right. Yeah. The skill, knowing how to do that's what you need to do, and most parents, I mean, same thing with learning disability parents are like, well, my child needs learning disability diagnosis. I'm like, well, your child is not learning how to read. So we can teach them reading with or without a learning disability diagnosis. I agree with you 100% there.
I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss what's going to be a very traumatic back to school experience in some states. Others will certainly handle it better.
Right.
It won't take much to handle it better than some places.
Right. It's true.
My daughter's assessment was in April. We got the results in the end of June. We are hearing from a lot of sources across America and elsewhere, quite honestly, that there are severe staffing shortages as teachers left the profession, as school psychologists left campus for personal reasons. A lot of people will begin the year without revised or updated IEPs and 504 plans. That doesn't mean that your child doesn't need supports. It just means you don't have the latest and greatest code numbers next to the report.
Right.
But
Right.
you will still have the legal right to have supports in place if your child is eligible for those.
Right. That's correct. Yeah, they can't take those away. It's legally binding, that document that you have, the IEP document.
And I think it's important to mention that I believe you mentioned this as well earlier. Your IEP plan, if you have one in a location and you move within a state or even across state lines, the IEP is a federal document.
Yes.
So when you move, that IEP is still in place. So don't panic if you're a parent who's had to relocate during COVID, if you've had to telecommute or change districts for any other reason, the IEP is still applicable.
Yes. 100%. It's a federal document.
And for something like Progress Parade, the supports are the supports.
Right.
The parents contacting you, it doesn't matter where they live.
Right.
Doesn't matter what state, what city, you're online and you're available.
That's correct. Yep. We can provide anywhere, really, anywhere you've got an internet connection.
Well, I really appreciate it. Again, let's mention it's progressparade.com.
Correct.
There is a form that they can fill out for an initial consultation.
Yep. It just on progressparade.com, right there on the homepage, you'll see book a free consultation, and that will be on my schedule. So then we could talk further if anybody had further questions or just wanted to discuss their child's needs.
For those parents who are just absolutely panicked because they don't have current documentation, haven't had current assessments, don't know what's going to happen, how can we reassure them that, yes, it's been a disruptive year, but your child can still get back on track and we can still help your child gain those skills? Really, I don't feel like this has been a lost year. A lot of people are panicked about this lost year. I think our children are going to prove to be incredibly resilient. Do you feel that same way about the children, that we're okay?
Yes, definitely. I'm confident that we're okay. I know that if anything, this year I think proved to all of us how resilient we are, and I think that's an invaluable skill. I think if you would have told parents, 16 months ago that, hey, we're going to have a pandemic and we're going to be stuck at home for over a year, I don't think anybody would have been able to wrap their mind around that, and they would have definitely thought they would have lost it and everything would fall to the ground. And but here we are. We did it. It wasn't beautiful at every moment, but I think taking home that lesson of resilience and that we got through it is going to be really important for us and for our students. I think it's not a lost year. I think we did take a lot out of the school year, and I know everyone's experience was very different. Like this is more than any other year. There is not uniformity in people's individual experiences. Every student had a very different experience, but So there might be some bumps going back. I mean, not just for diverse learners, but for every student. As we transition back, but we will continue to get through it, and it isn't a lost year. There was progress made in the last year.
I really want to thank Laura Reber for joining us, the founder of ProgressParade.com, a specialist in school psychology. We'll have a full bio up on the website and additional links as well. I really thank you for joining us at this very interesting time before school. Thank you for joining the Autistic Me podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you.